Guatemala's growing corruption scandal. Angry protesters call for President Otto Perez Molina to quit. Much of his cabinet has resigned and his former vice president has been jailed. So what next for the president? And can political corruption be weeded out of Guatemala for good? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Political corruption, fraud, conspiracy and bribery. These are the allegations angering the people of Guatemala. Investigators allege top government officials received a cut from bribes paid by businesses that wanted to avoid import duties. The scandal has been called La Linea, or the line. It was all uncovered by UN-backed investigators. President Perez Molina now faces impeachment proceedings. His former deputy has been jailed. A number of his cabinet ministers have quit in protest. Guatemalan protesters say now it's time for their president to face justice. From Guatemala City, David Mercer has this report.
Tens of thousands of people packed into Guatemala City's Central Park. They want an end to government corruption and harsh punishment for those involved. There is widespread anger and frustration at a political system people say has failed them, with calls louder than ever for President Otto Perez Molina to step down.
We are tired, but we know that now is the time to rise up. Guatemala has never been poor. The government has stolen from us. We need to rise up because we want to show the world that a people united can achieve change.
The president's televised denial on Sunday of any involvement in a multi-million-dollar scandal only served to bring more people to the streets. Many schools and businesses were shut to allow students and staff to take part. They were joined by groups from rural Guatemala who've been blocking roads around the country for days.
Guatemala might be a country of sharp divisions, with rich and poor, urban and rural seldom coming together. And that's what makes this protest so unique. People from across the country and from different social backgrounds uniting forces for a common goal.
The president watched the demonstrations on security cameras from the safety of a government office. Just days ago, a judge indicted the former vice president for fraud, bribery, and illicit association. And Congress has taken the first step in a process that could impeach the president for involvement in the same scam. Analyst Raquel Zelaya says the president has few choices available to him.
Guatemala might be a country with sharp divisions, with rich and poor, rural and urban seldom coming together. But that's what makes this protest so unique. People from across the country and from different social backgrounds uniting forces for a common goal.
Guatemalans will have the chance to vote for a new president in just over a week. But with the leading candidates all dogged by controversy, people here say their fight is far from over. David Mercer, Al Jazeera, Guatemala City.
So some big issues to discuss, and joining Inside Story today to do so, we have in Guatemala City, Martin Rodriguez Pellicer, editor-in-chief of Nomada.gt magazine. In New York, Anita Isaacs, professor of political science at Haverford College. And also in Guatemala City via Skype, Roberto Wagner, professor of international relations at Francisco Marroquin University. Welcome to all of you. Great to have you with us today. Martin, you have been covering these demonstrations extensively. Let's look at those first of all. Who is out on the streets? Because they've united Guatemalans in, I understand, an unprecedented way.
Yes, for the first time in our history probably, we can see together students from universities, we can see together citizens and peasant organizations that are joining and asking for the end of corruption and the end of impunity.
And Anita, how unusual is it to see these sort of scenes on Guatemala's streets?
It's highly unusual. I think that this is the first time, as both David Mercer and your other guest has said, that we have seen this. This is the first time that Guatemalans have managed to bridge ethnic divisions and class divisions to come together in a common demand for justice, the rule of law, and democracy. This is really, I would also say, the emergence of a new political generation in Guatemala, a post-war generation that is really looking forward and trying to build a solid peace and a genuine democracy.
Anita, is there any one group that's leading these demonstrations?
No, I don't think that there's any one group that's leading the demonstrations. I think that there are groups coming from across the spectrum. That, I mean, students are playing a prominent role, and galvanizing others. They're individuals, they're journalists, they're social media activists that are convening individuals, they're human rights organizations and justice and democracy and transparency organizations that are participating in, again, in mobilizing and galvanizing people, and they're individuals throughout the country who finally want to have a say in Guatemalan politics that have also taken to the streets.
Roberto, what is it about this particular scandal, La Linea, that spurred people into action now, to finally want this say in politics now?
Well, I think that the big issue here with the corruption scandal, it's happened before. That we have unfortunately a long history of corruption. However, for the first time, people not only have put into context just the dimension of the scandal, just how much money was being defrauded from the state, but also the effects that this has had. You know, for the first time, I believe that people actually said, well, this is just, everyone knew that there were some things going on, but no one really understood just how outrageous this whole thing was. And when everything was put into paper and when all the accusations were presented, that's when I think that's when people just said, we're going on to the streets to demand, you know, as everyone said before, changes, fundamental structural changes in Guatemala.
Martin, this scandal resulted in the loss of millions of dollars, as Roberto was just telling us. How has that impacted Guatemalans' lives?
Yeah, it has impacted because we have a health crisis and there are no medicines in the hospitals. There's no money for the schools, and especially there's another case that is next to this one where the president is related that killed 26 people from the social security system because of a corruption scandal. So this time, as Roberto was saying, the corruption scandals not only have a lot of evidence, but as well have shown us how lethal they can be for society. So I think that's what brought people out to the streets.
So people had just said, that's enough, we've had enough, we can't take this anymore.
Yeah, and one important thing is that after the vice president, after she resigned, they said it's not enough, the resignation, and now they want justice. And after she's being put into jail, it's not enough. And now the president's not wanting to resign because he has two strong supports, one in the parliament with another party that he's allied to, and one with the billionaire from Guatemala, the owner of one of the phone companies, and that is supporting him. And people say it's not enough, and then after the president resigns, sooner or later, they're going to say it's not enough. They want to end this system of corruption and impunity.
Anita, is the president's resignation a surefire event? Because he's certainly not showing any signs of wanting to step down.
No, I think he has no intention of stepping down. I think he has other plans in his mind. His objective is to make it out of the country safe and sound one way or another. I think his first and preferred option would be to last out his term and to be appointed to the Central American Parliament so he can extend his immunity for another 4 or 5 years. The other default option is for him to flee the country and to go to Panama, which doesn't have an extradition treaty with Guatemala, and which is a place where a lot of former dictators go to die, so to speak.
Roberto, the proceedings for impeachment have begun against President Perez Molina. Can he last out his term? Can he survive that second impeachment attempt?
I think it's going to be very hard. I think that the pressure, the social pressure right now on the congressmen that are responsible for for giving way to the impeachment process is very, very tense. It's very, very high. Just yesterday, one of the members of the commission that is looking into this was accusing the other members, the president of the commission, for not holding the first meeting. And the private sector, the organized private sector, also gave in to the social pressure and presented a judicial resource to have these proceedings be as fast as possible. So I believe that it's going to be very hard. 5 months for Otto Pérez Molina to stay in power, it's an eternity. With the social pressure, with just every day the protests and that are going on, I think it's going to be very hard for him to hold out.
Okay, Martin, what evidence is there against the president? I mean, the evidence against the vice president seems pretty clear, and she's been put in prison. But what evidence against the president that he, if he wasn't even directly involved, that he at least knew about La Línea scandal?
Yeah, there has been shown evidence against him as well, even stronger than against the vice president,
right,
with him ordering the positions in the structure, with Excel documents in the computers that were sized, with agendas, with meetings. I mean, there's a lot of evidence against him, with witnesses as well. There's a lot of evidence against him, and I just wanted to add that like 4 years ago, a former president wanted to flee, and at the end he was sent back, and the Central American Parliament has not given immunity to presidents accused of corruption like Martinelli in Panama or the former president of El Salvador. So I don't think that he would remain in the country with impunity, and I think that he would probably have to be sent to jail like Ms. Valdetti.
Anita, how much support do you see for the president at this point? And is that support solid, or is it falling away?
No, I think the president is completely isolated. I think he's desperate. I think he's isolated. I think he's been abandoned by his cabinet, by even his closest advisors. So I find it hard to imagine that he can last out his term. I agree with the other guests on that very strongly. I think that the other unknown at this point is what the United States is doing behind the scenes. They haven't been very active publicly, other than to signal through social media their support for the protests. But I think it's very important to find out, or to figure out to hear rather, what the U.S. is also doing, and other international, other foreign governments are doing behind the scenes to exercise pressure on Pérez Molina.
Absolutely.
I think at this point there's a widespread consensus that the president should resign.
Well, let's use this opportunity to just talk a little bit more about the U.S. involvement in Guatemala, because the U.S. reportedly helped the Guatemalan military in its 1954 coup, and it sent millions of dollars worth of aid to the Central American nation every year since. Most recently, American Vice President Joe Biden announced a $1 billion security and economic package for Guatemala, Honduras and El Salvador. But Guatemala's recent political turmoil is now jeopardizing that aid. Roberto, how do you see the U.S. being involved in events there in your country?
Well, I think that the main concern from the U.S. is not just specifically Guatemala, but if we consider that there's also a political crisis going on in Honduras, and there is a security crisis going on, unraveling in El Salvador, I think that the main concern from the U.S. right now, given its history of the geopolitical importance of what we call the Northern Triangle of these three countries in Central America, is to avoid instability, to avoid that for the regimes to fall. After the Honduras coup, you could see how the Zelaya coup in Honduras, you could see how the U.S. played an important role there. So I think that the United States is very concerned that our countries do not just completely fall apart, and also to try to prevent governments that are just not going to be aligned to some of the U.S. interests, particularly with regards to questions of migration and the war on drugs.
Yeah, Martin, it's quite difficult, isn't it, for the US to know which way to turn, because obviously Perez Molina is no longer the man of the moment. But if he goes, who fills the void?
Well, there are legal situations that, the Vice President Maldonado would reach that point, and then there would be another process to bring someone in, and then to have elections. Now, as Martin said earlier, Guatemalans are pretty much fed up. Guatemalans are really not expecting for whoever is elected or whoever holds office after Perez Molina to behave properly, to behave transparent, and to...
Ricardo, we're just losing connection a little bit with you there. You mentioned elections, though. Let's move on to that topic, because, of course, the US will be very interested to know what's happening there. They're due in just a little over a week. Martin, should these elections go ahead in a little over a week? Are the conditions right for another presidential vote?
Well, there's the civil society has named these elections a fraud because of illicit funding, and a congressman in the U.S. as well. So I think these are the most illegitimate elections, because we don't know who is funding, how much is funding, and the report by the UN Commission 1 month ago showed us that 1/4 of the funding comes from the private traditional sector, 1/2 of it comes from corruption, and 1/4 comes from organized crime. So whoever gets the majority of the next Congress will be financed by corruption and organized crime. So these elections are very illegitimate, and a big part of the society is asking the Constitutional Court to suspend them for a couple months. Before that, there should be some reforms regarding to funding. I just wanted to add one little thing about the U.S.,
sure,
adding to what Roberto said, and is that the U.S. understands stability with the president in power. And the last 3 months have shown that they're wrong, and this president just brings more and more instability, because he's accused now of leading a criminal structure for corruption.
Anita, do you agree there with Martin that the conditions are not right for elections now in Guatemala, that reforms need to take place first?
Well, I agree with both things that Martin has just said and with what Roberto has said. I think, and I've written about this, that the U.S. really stumbled out of the starting gates on this one. And they believed that they could nudge Perez Molina towards enacting anti-corruption reform, which was really wrong-headed. And I think that they bet on the Perez Molina horse for far too long. It is I think, and in the process, they generated a lot of antagonistic feeling towards the U.S. That had really, we hadn't seen for a while, that the U.S. had spent years repairing its image, and now it suffered a serious setback. I want to believe that the U.S. has begun to shift course and is more supportive of Perez Molina's resignation now. I don't have clear evidence of this, of course. It's not been publicly stated, but certainly the United States bet on Perez Molina for far too long in a very misguided way. That's the first point. The second point is, yes, I do agree that the time is not right for elections. Elections in a week would simply yield an equally corrupt leader and set of members of Congress that we've had in Guatemala really since the transition to peace and democracy at the end of the 1990s. What is needed at the moment is some breathing space. There's a need for Perez Molina to resign, for members of Congress who are implicated either in electoral misdealings and political parties who are that to be removed, and for there to be a process of reform that is undertaken that enable elections that yield candidates that are cleaner and committed to the kind of structural reforms that Roberto signaled earlier.
Yeah, and Roberto, you also keen to see a postponement of elections, because if we look at even the front runner, of course, the current president is ineligible to run again, so we're looking at new contenders, but the front runner, Manuel Baldassar, even he is tainted by scandal.
Yes, also the UN-backed Commission Against Impunity found that his vice president, his vice presidential candidate, is involved in a money laundering case when he was involved with the Guatemala Central Bank. So we're looking at a situation in which, if he is elected, if the leading candidate is elected, his vice presidential candidate will have to immediately resign and present himself to the courts. I believe that the problem we have is that elections are just going to further this crisis.
Right.
I don't think that the elected government, a future elected government, is going to last its presidential term with the conditions that are currently present at Guatemala.
Okay, Martin, so if we say the election is postponed, if the president, Perez Molina, resigns, what happens next?
Well, there is a proposal by the National University to reform the electoral law to allow civical committees to compete against the corrupt political parties, and there should be a transition government from 6 months or so to call for new elections with new conditions so that we can keep on cleaning our system. And one important thing is that the candidate that is leading the polls has clearly said that he would practically close the UN Commission Against Impunity. And I think the citizen movement wouldn't allow him to complete not even 1 year.
Okay. Anita, we have heard at the beginning in David Mercer's report that the protesters are tired. If the election gets postponed, this process is going to drag out. I mean, there's going to be no imminent change, it seems. Can they, do you believe, from where you're sitting there, keep up the momentum?
Yeah, I mean, I think the momentum and the process shifts. If the elections are postponed and we move through what your other guests have said, a process of electoral and political party reform in anticipation of new elections that will be cleaner, fairer, and more transparent, then I think we shift somewhat from the streets and from a politics of protest to a politics of proposal or engagement in contributing to monitoring the process of electoral and political party reform, to making proposals to influence, to guide, and to shape it. Okay. So I think the tenor of politics in Guatemala shifts once the elections are postponed, Perez Molina resigns, and indeed is forced to face justice.
Ricardo, this process of engagement, it has been called Guatemala's Central American Spring. Would you agree with that?
In a way, yes. I think that, I mean, it's historic what we've seen in the streets just yesterday. I'm sure Martin was there as well, but I mean, you could see just everyone from everywhere, as the report that was presented earlier. Now, the other important factor here is that, as also Martin pointed out, that this has been a gradual process. And so far, the protests have pretty much imploded the executive power of Guatemala. But Anita mentioned something very important, and that is Congress. Because right now, a lot of the future of Guatemala is in congressmen's hands. So I believe that would be like a natural way to move next. The protest would probably move next to try to clean out a very corrupt Congress as well.
Okay, there, I'm afraid we will have to leave our discussion, but it's been absolutely fascinating and very interesting times indeed for Guatemala. We'll certainly be keeping a close eye on events over the coming week, whether or not those elections will be postponed and the fate of the President Perez Molina there. Thank you very much to all of you today for joining us. We have in Guatemala City, Martin Rodriguez and Roberto Wagner, and in New York we have Anita Isaacs. And thank you too very much for watching. If you have any comments about today's show, do get in touch by going to our programme page at aljazeera.com, or you can post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, bye for now.